Hey everyone, I think we'll get started. You're joining the So You Didn't Win the EPA Brownfields Grant webinar. Let's build back, or let's build your comeback strategy. Um, Really excited to have you here today. You are the folks that are really working at making your brownfield project successful. And we're glad to have you here. I'll go over the agenda quickly. I'm Beth Grigsby. I am with Kansas State University TAB program. I'm the Assistant Regional Director of Region 5. So you see me in Region 5 quite a bit. And then we'll have Scott Nightingale with Region 6. He's a Kansas State University Regional Director. He'll be talking about the debrief and insights from that. And then our team of folks, Kristen Brzozowski, Scott Nightingale, and Leslie Etzel, will be talking about common grant pitfalls and how to avoid them. And we've tried to develop this so that this is about you coming back in for the grant. And hopefully it's helpful. We'll have an overview of the procurement process. Maybe you want to consider grant writing in your RFQP. We'll then have a great panel discussion with Daphne Ryan from Texarkana, Texas, Chad Howell from City of Thornton, Colorado, and Brian Nyberg from Jacksonville, Illinois. Kate Lucas with Region 8, our Assistant Regional Director in Region 8, will be moderating that. And then we have Maggie Bellinger, our Program Director, providing an overview of the TAB services, e-tools, and other resources that we can maybe, hopefully, assist you in your progress on your project. So let's get this started. So if you have any technical difficulties, please dial 785-532 or 783, and it's in the chat, or you can email chsr@ksu.edu. Just so you know, this presentation is being recorded and will be available to you on the website probably next week. And also we have the link placed in the chat box for the presentations if you want to take a look at those. And then the Zoom basics. I think a lot of people are very familiar with the Zoom, but we want to talk about being polite during the webinar, making sure you're on mute. Also, make sure that your video is off. That really helps us with the bandwidth, sorry. And if you need to change your name, let's say you're under your organization name or something, so that we can get in contact with you with emails and things like that, you can put that into, you can select the participants button and select that. You'll see all the participants in the webinar. Select your own name, then select more, and then you can rename your screen name. Questions and feedback. For one, this is a very interactive process. We hope it to be, in that you are going to be asking questions that really will help a lot of folks. Your questions will help. And also, just to keep it really interesting, because there's so many things going on in the brownfields world these days. We also ask that you fill out the evaluation form at the end. That helps us in terms of how we develop programming for you, how we keep our presentations sharp and fresh and meaningful to you. So that it's a very short survey. You can use the link or go ahead and scan the QR message from the smartphone. Technical assistance to brownfields, that's what the acronym TAB means. We're nationally funded by the US EPA, and we provide free assistance to communities and tribes that are revitalizing their communities. Our services are free and tailored to meet specific needs. And it's really a great program. I've been I've had such a pleasure working for the TAB program for many years. And here's the national map. And as you can see, national program, KSU serves 5, 6, 7, and 8. We're in that purple region. And also we have tribal tab that serves the entire nation. So now we'll get started with take a step back, take a deep breath. Do you need an EPA Brownfields grant? The reason we bring this up is many times you want to kind of reconsider what your strategy is for getting your projects done. And so you know that you are not alone. And that's why we have the panel members here today to talk about their experiences and what they've done to make progress on their projects. So again, you're not alone. I want you to rethink how you're tackling your brownfield project. What's the scope? What work is needed? Do you have multiple eligible sites or just one? And by the way, are your sites eligible? Specifically cleanup. You've got to make sure your sites are eligible or you really just you're kind of wasting your time in a way. So make sure they're eligible. This is a great time to approach EPA with your questions. Um, Hopefully you have had a debrief or you've scheduled a debrief and Scott Nightingale will speak to that here in the next session. And also hopefully you've discussed your site with the state or tribal brownfields program. Have you worked with your state's brownfields program, tribal environmental program? That's important, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. Is your target area still relevant? What about your land use plans? Are those relevant to your residents and stakeholders? EPA sees these things in your application. And does the timing of the grant work for the needs of the community? Um, Again, I want to mention, have you requested your debrief? That's important. The timing is critical for that. Please do that. And now I want you to consider the odds. So 193 MARC grants, that's multipurpose assessment, revolving loan fund, and cleanup grants, were awarded for 2026, so 193. Next year for 2027, you're going to see 93 are projected. That's 100 less applicate or 100 less winners next year. The total for the 193 MARC grants this past year were $248 million. This next year, 2027, the amount is forecasted to be 64 million. Roughly 35% of the applications from last year, 558 applications were awarded. So you've got to think about the odds. What are the odds here? Because there's a lot of time that you put into this. But also, I've known folks that have applied 3 or 4 times and didn't get it until the fourth time. So I'm not trying to discourage you from applying. I just kind of want you to think about strategy. Um, and does that timing work for your community? In other words, do you have new leadership? That's something to consider. Are they on board with this? Maybe they have a different vision. So all that, just take that into account. And do you have the capacity to manage the grant? Really, it takes that meaningful engagement of the public is is actually that's tough to do many times, especially if you're in rural areas, but sometimes even in the bigger cities, it's very hard to get the engagement going and relevant to the public. How about your financial capabilities? Do you have the capacity then to draw down funds, to track the budget, to track your outputs and outcomes? These are part of the EPA Brownfields program when you have a grant. And the procurement piece. Are you capable of doing that? Do you know how to put together a scope for things like this? If you're thinking maybe capacity might be an issue, there may be a logical partner in your area, such as a regional entity or an economic development district, that may help assist you in those gaps in capacity and manage the grant on your behalf, which is nice to do. It's kind of nice to have that done. And so when it comes to assessment and cleanup activities, there are ways the state or tribe programs may assist you. And you may be working with a consultant, and that consultant may not know about all these resources. So make sure you knock at the door of your state brownfields program or tribal program and find out, do they have those assessment programs? This is work conducted typically by their contractors, the phase ones, the phase twos, the cleanup planning at no cost to you. And cleanup programs are offered in many states and tribes at no cost. So again, there's another alternative here for you to consider. Low interest loans for cleanups in many states, and remember, these states, the Brownfields program, they're the ones that provide those comfort letters, the closure letters for prospective purchasers and property owners to facilitate redevelopment. Um, they also help you, as I say here below, that with the regulatory background or contaminant impact of your site or possibly on other sites in the surrounding area. It's really good to talk through this with the state. Um, you can brainstorm on how to solve potential barriers to redevelopment. Maybe it's a deed restriction, some sort of engineering control. States are typically viewed in the eyes of the EPA as a cleanup authority for you. So typically the EPA is not signing off, it's the state. And what about the APCA? If you have a cleanup grant that wasn't successful this time around, you probably have an APCA. So that draft APCA, has the state reviewed it? That's important because if they're the ones that are going to give you closure, it should meet their standards. So this is a good opportunity to knock on their doors and say, hey, can you take a look at this? Let's talk about my project. Are there ways that I can do this differently? Do you have any recommendations? And then what about your other state agencies that you could look into, given what project you might have? And it could be economic development resources, it could be HUD, it could be DOT, it could be Department of Natural Resources. And then consider locally what you can use too. Do you have TIF funds available for your project? Something else to consider as you're moving forward on the redevelopment. And then the EPA offers free targeted brownfields assessments. Now, just so you know, many states manage those programs. So go to your state first. Um, if not, then you go directly to the EPA. This is at no cost to the community. You can get a phase one, a phase two, site characterization, additional assessment activities that may be needed to be done, cleanup options, cost estimates, development of an APCA for a brownfield site that's been assessed under the program. This is a great resource that I've known a few of my communities to take advantage of. And then there's other EPA opportunities for services. The LRTA, that's a Land Revitalization Technical Assistance, can help your community determine the types of brownfield site reuses that are feasible given local conditions. And it can be the infrastructure availability is one. Maybe the community has their own ideas for site design. These are things the LRTA can work with you on to develop that and use the planning activities that can be supported. There are very many. information on the site and local conditions, the design, conceptual design, understanding implementation resources. So here you'll see the link and you can contact EPA for that. And then we come to KSU resources and assistance. And I'll go over this briefly because I know we'll be talking about these things later with Maggie. But one thing I like to mention is our workshop and webinars. You'll see that over here by Outreach and Education. We do webinars like this one, which is great, but we can also come to your community and have a presentation or develop a workshop along with you. You are part of that process where we can reach out to your stakeholders, maybe to your real estate community, um, to the local neighborhoods and that type of thing. We can help you design that outreach. We can also provide the message. And many just want to know, well, what is this program? What can it do for us? And a lot of times you may not know. And that's something that TAB can assist you with in terms of what can be done and how it applies to your project. Another thing I'd like to point out, the one-on-one assistance. Again, identifying, prioritizing sites and what is your prioritization scheme. That's something we can help you develop. We also provide, and we have wonderful partners, folks in architecture, folks in I'm trying to think, real estate, financial experts. We have many great, nationally known many times, partners that help us help you. All of this is free of charge, and you might consider a resource roadmap where you consider the resources that you could use on your project success. And then finally, we can fill the gaps. As I mentioned, we can do market impact analysis, economic analysis. We can assist you with your community relations plan and public involvement. There's many things that we can do, but I'd much rather have Maggie tell you about it. And I'm going to skip on to Scott Nightingale with the next session. And remember, you've got a friend, and look at it. These are our tab directors across 5, 6, 7, and 8.
All right. Thank you, Beth. Um, if if you're all still, really interested in getting a grant after Beth provided so many great options for other ways to get some of the work done, um, one of the first things you're going to want to do is get a debriefing on your previous application. Now, in your June 24th letter that EPA sent, the your application was not selected letter, um, they offered a debriefing meeting, so you could learn from EPA staff about the strengths, the weaknesses of your application, and give you an idea how to improve things when you reapply. Um, that letter also gave a deadline of 15 days. Well, we are right now at 15 days today from your June 24th. Um, whoops, let me go back just a second. I skipped something there. I apologize. All right, something I have there at the bottom, I did want to remind y'all of. Um, It is a great chance to learn about things that EPA thought about your different sections in your application, but definitely it's not the place to argue. Um, the regional staff that are providing the debriefs, they often aren't even the ones that scored your application. They're relaying the information, they're sharing the notes from the panel, there's a separate process if you want to dispute the EPA decision, but the purpose of the debrief that's being offered to you to improve is not to argue about stuff. Try to look at it as you're already moving on, and it's about improving for the next time at this point. And the EPA regional staff are really interested in that being the outcome. They like to see their communities thrive. In your letter from EPA, there probably was a contact listed based on your region. Um, I have those here for the four regions that KSU TAB covers. If you're not in that region, any of those, just find your regional contacts online or from that letter if you want to request your debrief. Um, anyway, I'm going to leave that for just a second. Mention something else. This slide will be up if you don't have time to copy that down real quick. This slide, all the slides will be up on our webpage. And so if you don't get that down right now, later today, you can jump in and get this information. Again, deadline is today for the 15-day turnaround on those requests. I know some EPA regions have already scheduled with communities. Some have actually had a few debriefing sessions. Some are a little ahead of others, but get that request in. You're going to want to hear what they say about last year's application. All right, to get ready for your debriefing, um, get familiar with your application. This may sound silly, but more than half of the applications that go in for these grants are not written by the applicant. They're prepared by contractors. As the applicant, you're going to want to be in there and know what they're talking about. Read through it, know what the different sections have. When they come up with a comment that, well, we really didn't understand, a situation in your town, you need to clarify that more. You're going to want to know what they're talking about and not have to patch that together later. It will help you ask good questions while you're right there. So even if you didn't do the writing, read through it, be familiar with it. Invite your colleagues. It is always helpful to have extra people listening. The more of you taking notes, the more you might get out of it. And also ask EPA to clarify the rules before you get in there. Who can attend? If you did have a contractor write it, are they allowed to attend your debriefing meeting? Can you record it, or is it all just verbal? Can you get it in writing? Is there a time limit? Find out these things, be prepared when you go in, and it'll help it be more productive for you. All right, during the debriefing, again, take notes, document everything. More people you have, the more that will help, but be organized with that. You don't want five of you all trying to speak at once. You want to be clear about asking your questions. The EPA regional staff, again, they're often not even the ones that did the scoring. And so what you'll have is, they're telling you what they're reading as the comments on your debrief. Um, but don't be shy about asking for details. You know, um, if they say, "Hey, we needed more detail in the budget," you know, ask them, what detail are you talking about? What specifically was missing? You can even ask about scoring things, although I don't know if they'll give you quantitative answers, Hey, did we lose a bunch of points for that, or was it a minor thing? Getting clarification is not the same as arguing. And get clarification on stuff. This is how you're going to make it better. And so that is encouraged. Um, we have a little time here. I'm just curious, and I haven't seen anything in the chat on debriefs, but if anybody has received a debrief, I know we can't speak, but if anybody already has had one this year, could you please jump in the chat and maybe share that and how it was, and if there's anything significant about it you want to recommend to the rest real quick. And I see a note in there from Maggie saying you can ask about the specific points. That's good to know. In the past, we've been told that not all regions do that. Okay, Beth Ann, thank you. Very good. Very good. All right. That's good to know they're already out there doing them. I know that they are kind of behind even from last year's applications. They're kind of behind for this season of grants. And so they're really pushing to get this stuff done. So that's great to hear that different places are already out there doing it. So, and got a note, consultants are not allowed in the debrief. All right. Thank you for that clarification too. I mentioned that that's something to ask of your EPA folks when you're setting these up. Um, Years ago, the KSU TAB staff were sometimes invited if a community asked us. I know we're not allowed anymore. Also in the past, it was possible to bring your state. brownfield program people, and that's not the case anymore either. So knowing that it kind of evolves, um, don't be shy about asking. They can just tell you no if you are not allowed to bring somebody. Um, um, all right, moving on. Um, we are going to um, go and talk about if you're going to reapply and whether you have or haven't had your debrief, things you might hear that are problems with the grant in the debriefs, or just common things that are wrong. Um, and, Beth gave you some numbers before. Out of the 558 applicants, there was 193 awarded. Well, that means 365 didn't get granted. And something kind of significant, out of that, 45 didn't even get past the threshold criteria. Um, and so we're going to have a little bit of discussion of threshold problems. And then Kristen Prasosky, Leslie Etzel, and we're going to run through the four sections of the application and point out some specific, very common problems and how you might do better on those going forward. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Leslie Etzel.
Thanks, Scott. I do want to add real quick to what Scott said. When you get your debriefing and you find out, if they're giving you specifics on how many points you lost, keep in mind that some of you may have barely lost any points at all and still not gotten awarded. That's how tight this competition is. So keep in mind some of the stuff that we're going to go through in this section of the common pitfalls. It may not be applicable to you. You might you might be doing all of these things that you need to be doing to get the grant and be successful. It's just that maybe this year compared to another site, yours just wasn't quite there. So just really keep that in mind. Keep trying because next year it might be easier to get the grant than this year, depending. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so Scott had mentioned 45 people or 45 applicants didn't pass threshold. I know this is something EPA is kind of really wanting us to push of, going over threshold requirements. For all of the grants, sometimes one of the biggest pitfalls is just you didn't answer all of the threshold criteria questions. So be sure to really thoroughly read through that. Make sure you're answering every single question in there. Sometimes you might not be you're an ineligible entity type. So keep that in mind. Always, as grant season starting, check with your regional EPA folks to make sure that you are an eligible entity type. So you don't spend all this time writing a grant to find out, oh, we weren't eligible to begin with. So you don't have a unique entity identifier number at submission. This is really, really important. Do not wait till the last day to get this done. Absolutely, like as soon as you're starting to think about submitting an application, get this done because you will not be able to submit your application if you don't have that. And then you might not meet your drawdown requirements. So depending on when you're applying for a grant, if you have a previous Brownfields grant and you haven't spent a certain amount of that, you won't be eligible for the one you're applying for. So just always, EPA generally creates a little cheat sheet that'll show you the drawdown requirements for your current grant in order to apply for a new one. So just always check that to make sure you're eligible. And then for cleanup and RLF grants, you didn't own the site and did not establish the Brownfields liability protections, bona fide purchaser liability protection requirements. So that's what your phase one helps establish. You might be missing your state and tribal site characterization letter, or you didn't meet your community notification requirements. So just be sure before you even start writing your application, that you're doing all of these things so you meet threshold. Because nothing's worse than spending all that time writing these grants that are incredibly long and very cumbersome to then find out you didn't even pass threshold. So just keep that in mind. All right. Okay. So we're gonna have 3 little slides here that have this table that I kind of made up for section 1, your community need. You don't need to have to read, I'll go through them with you, but this is there for later reference. And keep in mind, community need, section 1, that's the first introduction to your community, to your sites that you are providing to the reviewer. So this is really where you're setting the stage. And you really want to hook them, the readers or the reviewers, because they're reviewing tons and tons of grant applications. And as someone who's been a reviewer, it gets, they all start to blend together. So really, one of the biggest pitfalls is just you're not being specific enough. You're not painting a great picture of your community. You're making it very generic. So find ways to make your community stand out, to be unique, for folks to really remember it and to be hooked and engaged when they're reading through your grant. I've heard before people say, it's a data-driven Hallmark card. So really pull on people's heartstrings in this first section of community need. So sometimes folks, they poorly define their target area. You need to have very clear, specific statements of what your target area is. And we'll show that in an example in a few slides. Your community story can be really generic. So like I said, make it unique, make your community stand out, make that reviewer really want to invest in your community. A lot of times folks don't prioritize or don't quantify their brownfields. They just simply state that they have brownfields. That's, again, it's just too generic. Be really specific. Show that you've consciously thought about all the different brownfield sites in your community. You've taken time to identify them, quantify them, and you have a working inventory. Okay, and sometimes folks have too many priority sites. We generally recommend folks keep it to, for community-wide assessments or assessment coalitions, you want it to be limited. You don't want to put every single site there. 10 is way too many, I would say. For community-wide, 3 is great. Coalition, you can go a little bit more since you're addressing 3 different areas generally. But also those priority sites should also be in line with your brownfields challenges in your communities, and that the potential redevelopment for those sites should show like it'll be a catalyst for your community for redevelopment. So be really, I guess, methodical about how you're choosing your priority sites. And then folks tend to fail to connect contamination with community problems. So really explain how the suspected contamination is contributing to disinvestment, job loss, housing shortage, all of that. And then folks tend to not explain why the EPA funding is needed now. Why now? Why not 5 years ago? Why not 3 years from now? What's happening right now that really has made you go for the grant? And don't kind of leave it to just, well, we just now found out about this funding. So be very specific in why you need it. And then I believe this is the last slide of here, but poor description of how grant will positively impact your community and spur further redevelopment. So they want to see that, hey, if we make this investment, what is the domino effect that's going to be created from assessing and cleaning up these sites and getting them back to productive use? Is that going to increase tax revenue, investment, jobs in your community? So be sure to be specific about that. Don't make unsupported claims. Always, again, data-driven hallmark story. So always provide data. Compare that data to state, national averages. Show how your community is currently doing worse than the rest of your state or the rest of the country. Really demonstrating that need. And again, don't just use one source of data. Sometimes folks overly rely on the census data, but also rely on tons of different information to really paint the picture of the need for your community. Okay, so some examples of how to improve this. So a weak statement would be, the target area is our downtown. A reviewer might see that and say, okay, well, what's your downtown? Define your downtown. A stronger statement would be, the target area consists of approximately 1.8 square miles bounded by maybe North Main Street and South Main Street, and whatever some other streets would be. So someone could look at a map and say, okay, here is clearly their target area, or it could be a specific census tract number, things like that. So be very, very specific about your target area. Another weak statement would be, downtown area contains numerous vacant buildings that discourage investment. A stronger one is, target area contains 27 vacant commercial buildings, representing nearly 18% of the downtown building inventory. 14 of these properties are known or suspected brownfields. Commercial vacancy has increased 35% since 2015, resulting in declining tax revenue and reduced private investment despite the area's location along the city's primary commercial corridor. So you see how that's very, very specific. It quantifies the data, it compares it. We can see a clear trend over time, that vacancy is continuing to increase. This paints a much better picture than that first statement. And then a weak kind of unsupported statement is, developers are reluctant to invest. A stronger statement would be, developers have expressed interest in several downtown properties, but have consistently identified unknown environmental conditions, potential cleanup liability, and assessment costs as significant barriers to acquisition and redevelopment. So again, that's a much stronger statement backed up by, this one's not necessarily has specific data, but it's, word of mouth that this is happening. So again, always be as specific as possible, quantify your data, compare your data or your statistics, and be outcome oriented. And I would just suggest going through and highlighting sentences that just are vague, and start working on, how do we improve those sentences? How do we, make them stronger and all of that. So with that, I am going to pass it on to Kristen to do section 2 of the grant and the common pitfalls.
All right, thanks, Leslie. So some of the most common pitfalls we see in section 2 are listed here. The first one being that not every aspect is covered within a question. So you may have noticed that a lot of times in different subsections, there might be 2 or 3 or sometimes more things that are being asked for in that area. And a lot of times we're seeing that, 1 or 2 of them might be covered really well, but it's not hitting on each piece. And so that's a key part, because you will lose points, if you don't cover up an aspect of things that were requested in that section. Another thing is not explicitly stating if your community is small or low income. And this comes about within section 2, there's an area that the text is bolded, which is a clear sign. If anything is bolded in the guidelines or underlined, it often means it's really important, or maybe it's something that's frequently missed. So you want to pay extra attention there. And this one is key. It basically will mean that you can't score 2 points. And in this competitive of a program, 2 points is a make or break. So if your community is small or has a low income population, you really want to explicitly state that. And then making sure that that what you're talking about in section 2 ties to your story in section 1. And what I mean by that is, sometimes we'll see applications that maybe in section 1 they're talking about the historic decline they've seen in their community and the loss of jobs and what the result of that is. But then in section 2, we've suddenly jumped to the need for housing. And that's highly likely to be real, that your community does need housing. But there was no connection point to what was discussed in section 1 and that need that was discussed in section 2. So the thing you're going to want to do is, modify section 1 to make sure you're telling a complete story. So you may need to add information there. Section 2 has challenges because some of the questions appear to be very similar to one another. And so we do sometimes see data that isn't relevant for the question being asked. It's close, but it's kind of in a different area than it should be. And so for this, I would say, try to go through and really compare, does this respond to the specific request? This is an area I would definitely say it's a good conversation to have with TAB, where we can help. If you lost points in this area, we can help try to identify, okay, well, what data source maybe is more relevant? We also occasionally see where there's good data points included, but they don't tie into the narrative. They're a little bit disconnected. So for example, let's say the site that you're talking about the most, or some of the concerns that are brought up are maybe former industrial properties that have issues with solvents and petroleum and other things. But then suddenly the answer to one of the questions is all about concerns around lead-based paint. And that lead-based paint concerns are real, but it misses the tie into that. And so either you want to go back into other sections to bring about how those lead-based paint concerns are wrapped into your project, or you may want to look at other data points that specifically support the narrative that you're talking through in the application. We also, and Leslie mentioned this, the comparison to county, state, and national averages is really important. So it's something you'll want to do. And then we've seen applications where sometimes it's either overly reliant on tables, and tables are a really good way to convey data. It's a good way to get a quick snapshot of the data points and the comparisons, but they don't tell the story of how does that information impact the people living there. And that's what you want to get at in the narrative. And conversely, sometimes we see applications that are really narrative heavy, which it's good to have some of that, but the data can kind of get lost in the text. And tables just really provide, again, a quick way to quickly see the data. And it honestly makes the page a little more readable just because it breaks up the text a little bit. And then on community outreach, there's that whole table about roles and responsibilities for your community stakeholders. And you really want to make sure that it's genuine, it's diverse, and it's meaningful. And genuine meaning, you don't just want a laundry list of nonprofits that are in your community. You really want this to be reflective of organizations that you are working with very specifically on your project or the goals you have around brownfield redevelopment. It should be diverse in that it covers a good cross section of people that are impacted. So ideally you would have a group that's representing the people directly impacted by the brownfields. Maybe that's a neighborhood organization or some other group, all the way to people who are involved in the reuse side of it. So for example, if let's say your application includes housing, you probably want to have a housing development group or your public housing authority if they are a partner. And again, they need to be actual partners in the project. And then meaningful, you really want to lay out what is their role. And that can be, again, in site selection. It can be kind of more in the middle part of the project. It could be them helping with engagement, all the way to the future reuse. Who's helping with that, and what are they contributing specifically? And then on outreach, oftentimes there's a good explanation of the types of outreach that will occur, whether it's, a combination of meetings and online input solicited, but then it doesn't cover how does the community respond to that? So once the input it has been received, how is that then shared out? And the decision-making aspect of things, how is that then shared out? So that's something we'd really suggest checking in your past application. So a couple of things that we'd suggest doing now. So Scott covered the debrief, and that's such a key piece. There's so much learning to get, and there were great comments in the chat about people finding that to be really helpful. So if you have not, and this is, I know, I'm like the fourth person to say it, but please get your debrief scheduled. And then afterwards, we definitely suggest a follow-up call with us, and we can talk through the specifics about what you heard from EPA on your feedback and what are the specific ways we can try to address that. It can be beneficial sometimes to have the state agency on that call as well, the follow-up call. And then if you lost points in the areas around data, we'd highly recommend some resources at ksutab.org. You can use this link and you can search for helpful hints, which are organized by grant type. The grant research links, which can help identify new or other sources of data that might be useful, and then the successful grants. And that is really beneficial because you can see how recent successful grants laid things out within their application and just give you ideas of options for that. And then just to wrap things up, two more items that you would want to think through. If you don't already have, good relationships built, you likely have very good relationships built, but if you don't have the specifics of what stakeholders are going to be doing throughout your project, or you're helping meet your brownfield goals, start now by reaching out to establish and build those relationships with the stakeholders. And this would be recommended whether you are reapplying for EPA funding or not. There's a lot of benefits to expanding your the stakeholders who are involved in your project. And then you can also refine your community involvement plan now, including how you'll respond to community input. And I will turn things over to Scott to talk about sections 3 and 4.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. As mentioned, we're going to cover 3 and 4. I'm going to kind of go through some of the actual subsections too. One of the pitfalls we see in the task description subsection, EPA will say there's been a lot of, lack of detail. This is actually the opportunity to explain, this is what we want the money for. This is exactly what we're spending it on. The rest of it is very supportive, but they really want to know what it's going to be for. Included in this on cleanup grant applications, sometimes the applicant relies on the ABCA to tell the story. Can't do that. It needs to be part of the grant application itself. Now, in addition to the detail on what the money's going to be spent on, sometimes EPA will identify a lack of support tasks. I'll give you an example. We helped a while back. There was a community, they had a community-wide assessment, and they were spending 100% of that on the assessments. And that's great. But they didn't explain in their draft application how they were doing the rest. Who was doing the management, who was going to meetings, who was, and that part of it, EPA wants to see that you have a plan for that. So make sure you explain the support tasks. You don't say they're funded by the grant, but if there's obviously something missing, explain how that's going to get covered in another way. All right, regarding the schedule, um, you're going to see a common theme on all of these, and it's lack of detail. Um, EPA wants to know that you have a plan. Um, you know, Everybody realizes things could change, but they want to see that you've thought it out. In my 4-year grant, here's how we're doing things. We're going to get, the QEP, by the second quarter, and we're going to have, these assessments done by the midpoint. They want there to be specifics in the plan. With that, make sure it's something logical. We had one we saw come back. They had assessments being completed, a couple phase twos in the first quarter before the QEP was even on board, who was to do those assessments. So make sure everything's logical, that it fits together, and you can kind of lay that out now. You can kind of start planning how certain things are going to be. And that comment on being specific, that actually goes for pretty much the entire application. Um, you want to be realistic about what you're going to say. Um, my gosh, I don't know that I'm doing that. Let me try this here. All right. Sorry about the jumping around there. But you do want to provide specifics. Um, That also has little gravity in the task activity lead. You want details on who's doing each task. It's something they ask for in the application. Sometimes it gets left out. Um, Make sure that's in there. Make sure it's justified. If you're subawarding something to somebody, explain why. Why is that not you? Why is that being given to somebody else? They'll want to know those things. And you can establish that now. I mean, the guidelines aren't going to be coming out until fall, probably, right? Um, a lot of the stuff stays the same year to year. There are certain requirements that are statutorily driven. The statutes are not changing. There will be little tweaks, but most of these sections, most of these subsections are going to stay pretty close to the same. And so it's not too early to start laying all this out with your planning and some of your details. All right. Cost estimates. Again, lack of detail. Um, Also, in addition to having detail, they are going to want you to have things somewhat up to date. For a few of you, if you're applying again, it may be your second, third, maybe even fourth time. Make sure your costs are updated. Make sure you're using local, real values. For example, what's a phase one cost in New York City versus what it costs in, Dallas? Your reviewers are from all over the country with EPA. And so make sure to tell where this stuff's coming from, but get a good local amount that you can carry forward. All right, measuring progress. EPA has commented on different applications that there's not an internal system for keeping track of progress. Now, the progress measuring, that's outputs and outcomes. The outputs are usually pretty simple. How many assessments have we done this quarter? How much money have we spent on, community engagement? The things you're going to be reporting quarterly. They are also interested in the long-term outcomes. Um, how is this really helping? Back in your narrative, in the section 1, you've explained why this grant's needed. Well, how are you going to show that? How are you measuring that? Gave an example here. If you're supposed to have downtown revitalization, what measurements are you using? You know, the number of buildings that are, in use. Are you doing that based on tax revenue? Right now, if you're planning on using those things to measure outcomes, go ahead right now and establish the baselines. You know, what's your current tax income from downtown? That way, as you start to implement your grant over time, you will be able to show these things. EPA really wants to be able to show that the money they've invested in your community is working. So try to get baselines set up, and you can do that even before the grant application period starts. On to section 4, it's your program capability. Again, lack of detail is a big problem. For those of you that are reapplying, um, it's even been 9 months since the first time you did this, probably. Make sure all the staff are still in the previous roles. Everybody's still doing the same things, and have a succession plan. Um, we have seen applicants lose, 1 or 2 points because they didn't explain what might happen if the lead person retires. Um, Leslie mentioned it earlier. These things are incredibly competitive, and 1 or 2 points will be the difference. For example, this past year, the community-wide assessments were 155 total points. There were applicants that got 152, only missed 3 through this whole thing, and that wasn't enough to get a grant. So try to strive for every point. And again, KSU TAB's here to help you with that. Um, we've talked about quite a bit about improving the application, but in addition to that, before you apply next time, you can actually improve the project itself. Sometimes, your application's as good as it's going to be for what you've chosen for a project. So consider things that could actually improve the project that the application is reflecting. Um, that might be a change in priority sites. Maybe there's something that you think will show better as a priority site to actually help the community. Also, involve EPA in the off time, between grant cycles. Um, Beth mentioned the EPA TBAs and the LRTA projects as alternatives to using grant money. There are also great ways to enhance your project so you can have a better application next time. For instance, if you're pursuing a community-wide assessment grant, go ahead and have EPA or your state do a couple TBAs, do a couple assessments for you on the sites that are really important. Um, it just shows that you're working on stuff. You're not just sitting idle between application cycles. Same thing with the land revitalization. There can be, reuse studies. There can be business viability analysis, things that actually will have concrete, answers that improve your project. Also, you might change some of your partners up. There could be things you want to do differently based on priorities in the community. Sometimes that's forced anyway. You might have community partners. You might have had a nonprofit, and they're not around anymore. I mean, things change. Make sure your stuff's up to date, and think about ways the whole project can look better, not just the application itself, but the entire project. All right. I'm going to move on here. We are ready for a little Q&A break because we've been talking for quite a while, sharing some information. So we're going to take a break, do some Q&A, and we'll use the chat for that. And also want to remind you all, we're going to have, a chance for you guys to, provide a little feedback on the event. We're showing this now because it's been an hour and some people may have to leave. But I don't encourage that at all. Really want you to stay for the part that's coming up, particularly the procurement and the panel discussion. It's going to be really good to hear. So please stay. But if you do find you need to go, feel free to go ahead and do the thing now. Let's go ahead and take a look at the chat here.
I don't think we had any questions that haven't been addressed yet, but we did have a great comment about utilizing the state's TBA program first, and they've been able to do that. So that they found that to be good advice.
Good. Yeah, and I think Beth mentioned that earlier. Normally, the state is the first place you check for your TBAs, and they usually have a relationship with the EPA region as to who takes which ones. Sometimes it's just based on capacity. Sometimes it's based on the difference in there's some states, for instance, that may not do building materials assessments. They might not be set up to do asbestos surveys as part of their TBA program, or some of the extra stuff. Maybe they're not set up to do a structural analysis of a building if you want that as part of an assessment. Other times, for instance, in Oklahoma, the OCC, they'll do ground penetrating radar on their TBAs. whereas EPA doesn't always supply that. So different capabilities of the different groups there. All right. Um, we are also going to have time for Q&A at the very end, if something springs to mind when we get to there. So, oh, I see a hand raised by Maggie, who doesn't need to be unmuted. So,
I have a question. When is a good time for applicants to submit for a TAB grant review?
oh, I love your question, Maggie. Well, that is a service TAB provides. We will review draft applications. Now, um, if you want a review of last year's and with discussion of the debrief notes you have, just get a hold as soon as your debrief's over. It's already been mentioned. Get a hold of KSU TAB, set up a meeting, and during that you can talk about perhaps having a review. Those are done within the 4 KSU TAB regions. Your regional people will take care of that. Once the guidelines come out in the fall for the new cycle, um, we start taking requests for reviews of your draft FY27 grants. And those actually, I'm going to coordinate that this year. And we'll have information out to folks on that through eBlast and other things once the guidelines come out. And we have a substantial review process. It's a lot of the people here, but we also have partners, some ex-EPA people, some consultants that used to write these for people and don't anymore. We have a big review team. And so, yeah, we're happy to do that during the time when the guidelines come out too. But yeah, for evaluation of your previous one, again, the guidelines change a little each year, but not that much. So it is a good thing to do. Contact your regional folks, and they can compare last year's to the debrief comments and start a plan for improving it.
Yeah, we've got a great question here from Addie, and she is asking, would it strengthen an assessment grant application to explicitly state that the grantee will be able to secure access to privately owned sites for assessment? And if so, what section of the application would be a good place to include this?
Well, Addie, I think it's a very strong thing to do for the priority sites. And so in the description of the priority sites is a place I have seen that before where they will mention as their, because those are the ones that people, the applicants give the most detail on. And I've seen that listed many times where, hey, we already have access permission. I think that shows well. I'm not the one scoring it at EPA. And they don't necessarily have that in the criteria, but they just want you to describe the site. But I think having the access is a good sign that the applicants thought about the work and ready to go.
Thank you.
Okay, as I mentioned, we're not done taking questions, but we will move on with presentations. We're going next. Kristen Prasasi is going to speak a little bit again, and she's going to talk about the procurement process. And so, Kristen, please jump in.
All right. Thanks, Scott. So I will be talking about the procurement process if you're using EPA funds. So anytime that you are applying for a grant and anticipating use of those grant funds, there is a specific process you'll want to follow. And in this case, for those that are looking at an application for this fall, you're going to start thinking through what areas you need help with. So what areas do you feel confident that you have the internal expertise and capacity to do? And where do you maybe decide that you need help or are looking for help from an outside contractor? And this is one area where we get a lot of questions is around, can I procure for grant writing or how does that work? So just want to cover the various ways that this can, because there's several different options. So some entities might decide, we have the internal capabilities to do the grant writing work and we'll plan to procure for assistance with implementation help if we're awarded the grant. So that's an option. You also could elect to procure for help for grant writing assistance, and then if if the grant is awarded, to then procure for the aspects of implementation where you're looking for help. And another option would be to procure for both grant writing and implementation services if the grant is awarded. You really need to make so that isn't an allowable thing to do. You just have to make sure that you're going through a fair and open competitive process. And we'll talk through what that process includes. But as you identify, what's going to be done in-house and where do you want help, you're going to want to be very clear about those pieces. So it's not just grant writing. If you are procuring for implementation as well, you want to think through some things are really clear. If you're procuring for assessment and you need help with phase ones and phase twos, that's likely going to be a qualified environmental professional. If you are including things like community engagement, which is in a lot of applications or most, you can decide, is that something you do in-house or do you do you include that in the contract? So make those clear distinctions and then whatever the contractor is going to be assisting with, you'll define the scope. So looking at specifically the tasks, the deliverables, and the timeline. And with a timeline, you want to be not only thinking about an EPA grant timeline if that's awarded, but if you have other funding sources that have specific timelines, you want to make sure you're accounting for that, or other just project deadlines that need to happen. You want to make sure you're including that. Then if there is other funding, the EPA funding requirements and any other funding requirements, you want to make sure that's covered, as well as any tribal or community priorities. And the process that you would be going through is called a request for qualifications and proposals. Again, this is a way to make sure that you have a fair and open competitive process. And you want to put together very clear documents that cover, again, that full scope. And your scope really becomes the basis of your RFQP. But then you also spell out how is the proposal process going to work? So what is the deadline? What do you want them to include in the proposal? And then how are things going to be evaluated? Some things to know right off the top, TAB has sample templates of RFQPs for the various types of EPA grants, and we have them with and without grant writing. So really, whatever route you're planning to go, and whether you're procuring now or after you've received a grant, we're happy to provide those templates in the correct type for what you need. You do not want to accept help from a contractor who might want to bid on your work. So sometimes I think, consultants or contractors are trying to be helpful by saying, well, here's some samples to get started. But if they do that, it's viewed as an unfair advantage, and then they have to be excluded from the competition. So you really just want to either come to TAB and have us send them to you, or you can contact other communities who've gone through the process and just ask for their template. In addition to us sending it out to you, we are happy to answer questions that you have as you're completing the template. And then as you draft it, if you would like us to do a review before you issue it, we're happy to do that as well. You also want to be careful to not be overly restrictive within your RFQP documents. So you definitely want relevant experience, but you don't want to be asking for exact. So for example, you don't want to say, we're looking for a firm that has successfully done brownfield assessment and cleanup that's been funded by EPA Brownfield funds. You want to leave it more open that you're looking for a firm who has successfully helped implement brownfield assessment and cleanup. You also want to keep the solicitation open for at least 30 days to allow for that open competition, and advertise widely. And that would usually mean, starting with your normal procurement channels, whatever your policy says. So if it's posted on your website or published in a specific place, and then expand from there. So maybe you live in a state that has a league of cities or a league of municipalities that allows RFPs to be posted, or you have a brownfield association that's willing to post them. A lot of communities will compile a list of contractors who do that type of work and send it out directly to them. And you don't want that list to be too narrow. You don't want it to be only one or two contractors. You want it to be more broad, and you can get ideas for who to include on that list by contacting, again, other communities who've gone through the process, or touch base with your your state brownfield program. They won't be able to make recommendations, but highly likely they'll know the consultants or contractors who do that type of work. A couple of other things to keep in mind is that you want to make sure any communication is very transparent. So if you're accepting questions, you want to make sure that those questions and the responses are posted in a public space or on your website that can be seen where any potential responders can view them. And then we suggest, and we have this in our templates, that you include the option to extend the contract. That just gives you some flexibility if you find that that's desirable for any reason. You can, you'd be able to do that. It's not an indefinite extend, but you'd be able to move forward with an extension at that time. And then again, make sure any compliance requirements are included in the RFQP. And do set a page limit, just because otherwise you could end up with, 50-page proposals submitted, and you hopefully will have many of them to review, and it can be kind of cumbersome. It also helps the respondents to know what's expected and gives them more definition on what to submit. And then, as always, talk to other area governments about their experience. The evaluation criteria needs to be included in your RFQP. And some of the criteria you may want to include would be things like the proposed work approach, and how that aligns with your plans and how you would like to move forward, their experience on similar projects, their technical expertise, and then cost. And cost is one that is not optional. You do need to include that, and it should be at least 25% of the score or the weighted factors. We'll walk through a scoring matrix sample in a minute, but we do recommend that there be a small team to evaluate the proposals, just because it's helpful to have multiple perspectives in making the decision. So this is an example that's taken from one of our templates. You can see here the criteria is laid out, and then as well as the maximum points available. So every respondent knows how things are going to be scored. There's then a column for each proposal reviewer to write in the points awarded and their comments. And this one's set up to show that, you're reviewing the written proposals received, and then you'd have the option, if you wanted to select maybe the top 2 or 3, to do then an interview to make the final selection. That is definitely optional, not a requirement, but it can be useful. And then when the selection is made, make sure that you're keeping records of that process. So keep your RFQP documents, keep documentation on where it was published and for how long. Keep your scores and your comments that were put together in making the selection, and keep all of that in a file. And then you are not required to select the lowest bidder, but if you don't, just make sure you document why the decision was made. And lastly, verify contractor eligibility in SAM.gov. A couple of quick things, just don't forget about your own local procurement policy. And then these two documents on procurement from EPA are really, really good resources if you have questions on procurement. They are definitely a go-to resource for that. All right. I am going to turn things over to Kate.
I'll go ahead and ask you to start off by introducing yourself, telling us where you're from, your organization. Just start with your name and organization, and then we'll get into what grants you applied for.
Okay, my name is Brian Nyberg. I am the Community Development Director for the City of Jacksonville, Illinois.
Chad?
Hi, I'm Chad Howell. I'm the Redevelopment Administrator for the city of Thornton, Colorado, which is a northern suburb of Denver, 150,000 plus, and we're only 70 years old. So we didn't exist 71 years ago.
And Daphne.
Hello, everyone. I'm Daphne Ryan. I am the Director of Planning and Community Development with the City of Texarkana, Texas. Texarkana is a twin city that joins Texarkana, Arkansas. Our population is just over 36,000 on the Texas side and around 29,000 on the Arkansas side, with an MSA of about 146,000. We've been receiving Brownfields grants since 2010. Previously awarded assessment, multi-purpose, 2 RLFs, 2 job training grants. And currently we hold a RLF, a job training, and a community-wide assessment grant in partnership. That grant's in partnership with the City of Texarkana, Arkansas.
Awesome. Okay, so Brian, I'll toss it back to you. Will you tell us about which grants your community applied for? Obviously, this webinar is geared towards communities who are not successful in winning their last grant. So if you could tell us kind of about your application process, what you applied for, when you applied for it, and how that's turned out.
Okay.
How it is currently.
So we have a vacated state facility in the middle of our town, so which is, I think it was established in 1851, which is a lot of old buildings. And the state has basically vacated it since 2012. So there's a lot of brownfield opportunity. There was a coal-fired power plant on this site. So I reached out to the KSU TAB program and got in touch with Beth Grigsby, Region 5. Let her know that I was interested in applying for a community assessment grant, to which we did. And when we shared the application together and went over it and applied, and we were denied the first time, but I did reach out for a debriefing, which helped very much. It was very competitive, and when Kristen mentioned that 2 points can make the difference of make or break your application, it was less than 2 points actually. They did say in the debriefing that we had a very good application. So of course we asked what could we do differently, and they told us what we could do differently as far as getting some community engagement and also taking a survey, to which we did both. We put out a survey with the help of KSU TAB and also the Delta Institute. We had a very good response from the community, and we also had a group that was started for community engagement. We reapplied for the grant and we were successful.
Awesome. Chad, same question. What'd you apply for and what happened?
Well, before I get to that, I should reveal to everyone that this is my 30th year in economic development, and probably 20 of those years I managed these grants way back. So the first one was a $100,000 assessment pilot grant in 1996. And then for 10 years in St. Louis, Missouri, I and my staff wrote and managed 7 assessment, RLF, and cleanup grants. And we were successful in getting them all. And we did them ourselves. So I moved to Colorado 11 years ago and kind of took a break from grants. I've still been doing brownfield work. And so in 2025, we applied for a cleanup grant for the city's #1 economic development priority, which is a circa 1955 shopping center that was effectively abandoned. It was maybe had a 50% occupancy. It had a horrible dry cleaning chemical problem that wasn't being addressed by the owner. And eventually the city made the tough decision to take it through eminent domain. So we did apply for a cleanup grant in 2025. We were unsuccessful, and we used a consultant. I'm not going to blame them because they were good. And we did take advantage of TAB's review process as well. So we learned a little bit from it. I think as a cynical government employee, I think that things had to be, I don't know how to phrase this. Things had to be pretty bad at a site. and things had to be pretty tight financially to get EPA's attention. I know they've got their fair in the way they review it and the way they score it and all that. But why were we 100% successful in St. Louis? It's because things were really bad there. I mean, disinvestment, abandoned properties. We had 11,000 properties in our land bank just through abandonment of properties. So we're definitely managing decline. And our congressional contingent was very helpful in helping us get EPA's attention too. So I think one of the reasons that we weren't successful is there were bigger problems in the Denver region and they got funded. So it's just, you're right, Brian. You just keep trying. You just put your head down and keep pushing, and eventually something will give way.
Okay, and then Daphne, do you want to kind of talk about the grants you have now, and maybe talk about, the last 5-ish years of the Brownfields program? I know you've been working in this space for a long time.
Sure. Well, currently, we do have a community-wide assessment grant in partnership with Texarkana, Arkansas, and it took us 4 years of applying to be awarded for that grant. Even though we've had successful applications since 2010. We also, prior to that, we applied as a coalition with several entities for an assessment coalition grant 3 years in a row, and were not awarded. And those were both with staff applications as well as consultant applications. So, it is highly competitive, like they've talked about, throughout this webinar. And but we do have, we've had 2 RLFs, and our first RLF, we received quite a few supplemental fundings on that RLF, and we have since closed it out, and are still getting program income from that. And we have a second RLF. We have a job training grant that we were awarded in partnership with a local college, Texarkana College. That has been very successful. We have expended most of our funds and plan to reapply this year. We were awarded in 2024. So we have a well-rounded Brownfields program in Texarkana, and we're looking forward to applying and trying to be awarded again for that job training grant.
So Daphne, I'm going to pitch it back to you. In that 7-ish year period where you were applying for assessment funds, whether that was coalition or community-wide, you were, experiencing a lot of challenges. Did you get debriefs with the EPA during that time? And what did those conversations look like? What was the feedback you were getting?
Yes, we requested a debrief every year that we applied, and they would continue to say that we were very close. We were right there. We had a lot of positive feedback in the debriefs, but we had some areas that they had made suggestions on improvements. But yeah, I mean, it really can be, it can really be within a half a point in these grants. So, some of the things that we had some feedback on was being specific. For example, don't just say high unemployment or higher crime rates in a particular area. Be sure to use very clear comparative or supported data. So I know one year we had put links in footnotes. And then, we were told reviewers are not allowed to click on links, so they will never see what we had referenced. So be sure to reference your data in the narrative, either in a table or, by statements in your narrative. A couple of other things. In the area of revitalization of target area, we were lacking detail with regards to being more specific on outcomes and benefits to the population in that target area. They felt we should have mentioned renewable energy or incorporation of energy efficiency measures more. That we needed more details to support sustainability of these claims. Things along that line, community engagement, to be sure that there was a clear understanding of who was representing communities in the target area, and not using, acronyms for their names. They want to be clear on the full name of each organization. And I know you're very short on space. Because 14 pages on most of it's not very long. And then a couple of other things. One time we, in identifying additional sites, we mentioned them. I think that section is like 3A. We mentioned it in 3A instead of mentioning it in 3AII, and that counted against us. So, sometimes it's just little things. You may have it included, but perhaps you just put it in the wrong section or subsection. So those are kind of the hot topic feedbacks that we had received in our debriefs.
Those are all really great comments. And I think as a reviewer, once you've gotten kind of your big comments addressed, it's those little nitpicky things that really do make or break an application. And so, yeah, a lot of that feedback is very similar to what we see in our grant reviews. And as you said, it's an extremely competitive grant. If you were not awarded, it is not to say that your project is not good. It's not that it's not deserving. It's not that your community is not deserving. It's just that these are extremely competitive. And there's maybe one thing that you put in the wrong area of your application, and that was the difference between you and another community getting awarded. And it can be a little random as to who does and does not get awarded. And you just have to keep trying, and eventually you will get awarded. So same question, Brian, I know you kind of touched on this already. Any kind of takeaways from your debriefs?
Yeah, the debrief was very informative, and she said we were very close. Of course, they want to approve your application, but they also want to help you find a way to be approved, and which they did. I mean, they basically told us exactly what we needed to do, and we did it, and then we were approved. I know there's not stories that are that lucky, but it was don't give up, just keep trying, and it worked.
Yeah.
And listen, I mean, there's agencies and entities out there to help, that want to help, and it's the process works.
Yeah. Chad, how about you? What did you get away, or what did you take away from your debrief with EPA? Oh, you're muted. Tricky dance.
I had noisy coworkers, so I had to mute them out. One of the things that I wrote down in all caps in our debrief was give us your Cadillac, right? We didn't give them our Ford Pinto, but we gave them our, I don't know what,
your Toyota Camry.
There you go. Reliable, but not too sexy.
Nothing special.
So that was a big takeaway. And also, believe it or not, they wanted a broader description of our community engagement efforts. As you know, we work together with TAB on probably the highest level of community engagement this city's ever done. And it was super rewarding and super successful. So that was something got lost in translation there. And then our cost ranges were too broad, and that's on me. We used engineering estimates that were produced during the legal proceedings for the eminent domain. So it was an expert's opinion, but they gave ranges, and they gave a high range and a low range, and it was too broad. We should have spent the time or the money to be more specific on that. So and we didn't reapply because I wasn't in a position where I could wait. We had the resources, and we moved forward with our own money.
That's a great segue, Chad. So the next question is, what resources did you pursue in place of the EPA Brownfield grant? And if you could get really in detail, I know people, who have big cleanup projects, they want to know how they can go about this.
Talk
about what are your cleanup costs? Like, I know you applied for $4 million.
Yeah, that was a big one. And what I was going to say is that there's a lot of help out there, and you guys already touched on that. And I'm sure most of the people in this webinar understand that. But every state and tribal agency probably gets money from the EPA. Kind of the same money. They have other taglines on them, like 104E or whatever. But they all get money, and they all want to help, believe it or not, especially if you're not a responsible party. If you go to your local environmental regulatory agency and you're not responsible, you're on the same team. You want to affect positive change and end up with a better community. And so it's easy to get people energized and to form teams there. So yeah, in Colorado, obviously we have urban renewal tax increment financing. So that's the TIF scheme here. And that's why we didn't have to apply for more money. We had money in the bank. We had 8 million in the bank, but really this project's probably an $18 million project for acquisition and related costs and cleanup and engineering and, yada, yada, by the time we get done supporting what comes next. And so, that's a heavy lift for most communities. And I know how lucky I am because I've been in places where you don't even have sustainable sources of funding for salaries. So I don't take that for granted at all. But I was also going to say, even if you're a small community, you've got passion around a site or sites. And you're already meeting with the regulators, probably, if there's an environmental problem. And so you've already formed a team. And so if you use TAB to do community visioning or to do a targeted assessment, you're generating value. It's information. The more information you have, the better your site's going to be and the more attractive it's going to be to the next guy. So I'm a big proponent of finding out where those resources are and use them all. Sometimes you have to, right? So like Michigan's also has a brownfield TIF. It's kind of limited what you can expend it on. Like when we do urban renewal in Colorado, we can also use it on infrastructure. So related streets and water and sewer. And so that's helpful. In Missouri, they have brownfield remediation tax credits, which once they're awarded to you, you can sell them for 80 to 90 cents on the dollar and use the cash you get to pay for your cleanup and assessment expenses. So there's a lot of ways to skin the cat, but the way to start is build your coalition and make sure people know about it. I mean, I know there's anti-lobbying rules associated with grants, but still, when you get the word out and you make sure your congressional contingent know about what's important to you, they're going to remember that. And not that EPA doesn't call them and say, hey, do you support this project? But chances are they'll talk to EPA about the project anyways, whether you apply for grants or not. So that's most of what I got, I guess.
Thank you, Chad.
Uh-huh.
Did you have anything else to add?
I don't think so.
Okay. Brian, I know you were awarded a grant, after your second application. In that interim year, between when you were denied and when you reapplied and were awarded, were there any resources that you pursued in place of that EPA Brownfield grant that other communities could pursue?
We reached out to the state since this was a state-owned facility. We applied on behalf of the state. So other than that, not really. But the silver lining of reaching out to the state after, this was a 3-year road that we traveled. We had to get permission from the state to apply on their behalf, which took months and months. And then we applied and denied, and then we went to debriefing and applied again, and we were awarded the grant. So then we were fighting back and forth with the state just to gain access for the cleanup, which took several months. Which I learned later. A bunch of the state's attorneys were worried about liability, but the silver lining to all of this is that after the grant was approved, after they went in and did phase 1 of the testing, there was miraculously $500 million placed in the state budget for cleanup of 4 different sites like this in the state of Illinois. So I think we shook the tree pretty good, and it worked. And again, that's the silver lining of keeping your head down and bulling forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and trying to make as much noise as you can. State appropriated funding is an option in many places, and so that's something that you may be able to take advantage of if you are not successful in kind of those larger EPA cleanup grant applications. Daphne, any kind of interim uses that, or interim resources that you used in between your grant awards?
Yes, so for assessment, we utilized, of course, TCEQ's Brownfields program. And then also Region 6 targeted Brownfields assessment program to do phase 1 and phase 2. We've utilized KSU TAB several times for site-specific planning and community engagement on our brownfield sites. All of those have been great resources and great to work with.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And you, between, the state resources that are available for those targeted brownfield assessments, they're also generally available from your EPA region. 50% of your community-wide assessment grant funding has to be spent on actual brownfield grant or brownfield site assessments. But you can also do planning work. If you work with your state and or EPA region in KSU TAB, you can get that work done. You may not be able to get quite as much of it done, but you can make progress, incremental progress on your site or in your area and on your sites, and still keep your projects moving forward as opposed to just waiting for a year and a half while you're waiting for the next round of funding. Okay, so we have, I think, about 5 minutes left, which isn't, I think you should all be able to talk as much as you want to. What advice do you have for a community that just found out that they were not awarded? Chad, do you want to go first?
Yeah, it's going to sound like I'm parroting what other people have said,
Yeah,
but don't take it personally, right?
Yeah.
Because what you've already done has value and can be used to build,
Mhm.
like Brian said, it's definitely used to build success the next time. So, yeah.
What advice do you have for communities who were not awarded?
Don't give up.
Yeah,
If you look at a baseball player that's hitting 300, you fail 7 out of 10 times. So yeah, just don't give up. Keep on keeping on.
right.
Don't
But
take no for an answer.
a 300 batting average that's pretty good.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I had never drawn that line before.
And make
Def-
sure that that you get the debriefing every time. If you don't get it, you really need to find out why and make the next application better.
Mhm. Daphne, advice for communities who were not awarded?
Yeah, I echo what they said. Also, reach out to other cities to see if they will
Yeah.
share their winning application with you. Most of them will. You're likely not going to be competing in the same year if they've already been awarded and not applying this year. And also, a lot of grant applications that cities apply for, federal or state, you really highlight how great your city is. But with the EPA Brownfields applications, you really want to pretty much paint a picture that without this funding, you're all going to die. I hate to put it that way, but it's true. One of my colleagues, the first grant application that they reviewed, they're like, don't you want to say something more nicer about Texarkana and really, paint a different picture? And I'm like, no, you really don't. So I guess but at the same time, you do want to reassure reviewers that their investment will be well managed. So highlight your financial controls, your grant management experience, and really talk that up, your internal oversights, and so that they know that your organization has the capacity to deliver this grant successfully.
That's great advice, Daphne, especially talking about your organizational capacity. A lot of communities I've found, that section can be fairly copy and paste. If you find a successful application, maybe you just take what they said and edit a little bit, but it is one that, if you're being kind of vague about things, you may not get awarded full points. And as we talked about, the difference of a point or two is the difference between a winning and an unsuccessful application. So really being clear about your organizational capacity is huge. And then as Leslie mentioned a couple of times, those data-driven hallmark stories, maybe think about writing your brownfield grant from the perspective of like a Oliver Twist character. How is he dealing with things? You really want to emphasize the negatives while still kind of communicating the grit and the determination and the things that make your community special. Another point, I don't know if folks mentioned this before, but EPA actually publishes all of the the year's applications on their website. They're available right now. I dropped a link in the chat. They usually take them off around August 31st. But if you are looking for examples of successful grants to kind of model your grant off of next year, that's a great place to start. If you want a little help, KSU TAB can help you narrow down the, send you maybe an application that's similar to your community in terms of size or project scope, just to kind of give you a little inspiration. I would say that is probably the easiest and least commonly utilized resource for people who are writing grants. It is so helpful to read those successful grants and to model your own grant after them. That is such a great place to start. Okay, and I don't see any questions from the audience, and I think we have about a minute left. So Chad, Brian, Daphne, Scott's got a question.
I do have a question, and it's a little off the straight reapplication topic. But Daphne, this is for you. You've mentioned the RLF as one of the things you have there, and that is an option this year. And as opposed to folks, cleanup grants are hard to get. They're hard to come by. Can you explain a little how you guys have used the RLF for some of those projects, maybe?
Sure. Well, the Hotel Grimm was our first, successful RLF project. We had used our original assessment funds way back to do phase 1 and phase 2. And the project took years to move forward, and, it would get very close, and then we'd have setbacks, and getting the right developer on board, was very hard. So it was many years, and we didn't have assessment funds anymore. So we utilized that phase 1 was updated multiple times during all of this. So we utilized, of course, TCEQ's Brownfields funds for updates. We also utilized Region 6 targeted brownfield assessment funds to update the phase 1 again. And so that was originally a $650,000 loan. And of course, the RLFs are loans. You can do grants to nonprofits. You can also loan to yourself. So if you own a site that needs cleaned up, you can loan RLF funds to yourself, but you cannot grant them to your city. So we have not utilized that option yet. We may in the future, but currently we have not utilized the option to loan funding to ourselves. But the Grimm project then turned around, and we did a second loan. There was additional cleanup costs that were not known at the onset, and so we did a second loan to them. We also loaned to another larger site that is going to be a mixed use site when it is complete. So we have 2 successful cleanups with the RLF funds, and we're still looking for others, and perhaps looking at a possible small grant to a nonprofit for cleanup.
Very nice. And that's a great tip. Even if you are awarded a brownfield grant, oftentimes with cleanup, there are unexpected cost overruns. An RLF is a great way to cover those cost overages. Okay, I think, Hannah, are we out of time for the Q&A? Yes, okay. So I'll pass it off to Maggie to talk about KSU TAB services, e-tools, and other resources.
Great. Thank you, Kate. And thank you for all attendees who are sticking with us. I know when it comes to these applications and webinars, there's a lot of information shared, and it can sometimes be a little heavy. So thanks for sticking with us, and I will do my best to wrap up and bring us home rather quickly. There's already been a lot of mention throughout this event about KSU TAB support, services, and how we can support you. So I'm just going to kind of quickly touch on some of these and provide a little bit more detail. As already mentioned by Beth earlier, KSU TAB is one of the national TAB providers where we are able to offer free technical assistance services to communities, states, tribes, nonprofits, navigating the whole brownfields redevelopment space. Really, our goal is to fill gaps and empower communities to realize that tangible change through helping with engagement, educating, providing tools and resources to assist. And we like to do that work through outreach and education, capacity building, or one-on-one assistance. So some of the services we can provide are, specific workshops, webinars, such like what we're doing right now, as well as doing very specific educational events for your community. We can also do individual presentations. I've often been asked to come speak to a city council or at a county commissioners meeting or a regular board meeting of some profit regional council organization to just kind of talk about brownfields in general. Give that Brownfields 101, talk about the grants and how important they are and how these grants can help leverage other funding and resource opportunities in your communities. We also have a plethora of resources available on our webpage for free. We have brownfield fact sheets. We have sample successful grant applications, as Kate mentioned. We have several free resources that are available. Here on the right-hand side of the screen is just a screenshot of what our resources webpage looks like. You can search by location, you can search by, a tag or a category to really find some information that can help you along the way. We can also offer free one-on-one technical assistance. And this is really can range anything from a phone call to talk about grant strategies. It could be helping you to identify and prioritize sites within your community. If you're thinking about it from a reapplication grant process, we can help strategize sites. Which sites should you list in your application? What does your target area look like? Things like that. We also do a lot of support for economic technical assistance, such as a market analysis. If you're going through your debrief and you're finding that maybe, again, those reuses maybe don't align with plans, or you're unsure of what a reuse might be for a particular property, that's an area where we can come help you and provide that information. We can help devise a community engagement plan. We can help do community engagement activities, say maybe now between now and the time you reapply, things like that. Beth also mentioned that at the beginning, maybe you don't need an, assessment grant, or you're not quite ready for that piece. So there's a lot of free services out there, free environmental assessments through your state programs, through the EPA programs, through maybe RLF programs. But how do you get some of those other resources, such as community engagement or market analysis, review of technical reports, things like that? Well, that's where TAB can step in. We really view ourselves as a gap fillers. So whatever needs that you might have that you can't get met through other resources, reach out to us and we will do our best to try to fill that gap and find that need for you. We have a plethora of partners and various experiences and expertise that help us provide, whatever assistance is needed. So we do have a good staff here at KSU TAB, but if there's something, that's a little outside of our wheelhouse, then we just tap into our growing network of partners to really be able to tailor that specific technical assistance to meet the community or project need, whatever that might be. We also have a lot of resources and online tools that can help you build capacity within your Brownfields program or support the grant application process. We have our Brownfields inventory tool. We have TAB-EZ, which is a MARC grant writing tool assistance platform. We have the platform for exploring environmental records that can really be valuable when you're looking to build that Brownfields inventory or identify priority sites. We have a new tool that we released last fall called the Community Benefits Calculator. Kristen mentioned that we have templates and templates and examples for, an RFP, RFQ development, whether you're looking to hire someone to support your grant writing efforts, to implement a grant if you've got it, or maybe just do some other work within your community. We have templates that can be helpful and we can do those reviews. And then, of course, we can do those Mark Grant reviews of your draft applications, whether that's now or in the future. So our Brownfields inventory tool, what is it? BIT is what it's, shortened or now kind of known for, is an online site data and really financial management, program management tool and resource. It was initially structured to mirror the property redevelopment process that allows you to input site information. You can include site name, the address of the site. What type of site was it historically? Do you have property ownership information? Pretty much any and all details associated with a particular site, you can input into BIT. And then you can map all your sites. You can track a specific property through that brownfields redevelopment phase. So as the site's getting assessed, as it's getting cleaned up, as it's getting redevelopment, there's sections within BIT that you can provide updated information for. If you have an ongoing site where there's the need for institutional controls or complaints, maybe it was a site that was assessed, cleaned up, redevelopment, but you still need to monitor it every so often. There's a section in there for that. It can also help you manage your grant funds or other funding opportunities, sources that you have. If you want to be able to demonstrate, oh, we spent X amount of dollars on this particular site, BIT has a section and a field that you can use for that. So it's really kind of your one-stop shop for environmental property, brownfield data management. You can also export your data out of BIT and use it for your own purposes, whatever that might be. While BIT is known as the Brownfields inventory tool, it is really much more beyond an inventory. As I mentioned, you can keep track of funding levels from various sorts of funding, how much funding was spent on a particular site. You can even sort, provided you have all the information in there, you can even see, okay, this particular grant supported X amount of assessments on these sites. BIT is also a collaborative tool. So if you have many people within your Brownfields program that you want to share information data with, and they are helping you manage your program and sites, you can add them as participants to a particular program. You can upload photos. You can upload files to, your site inventory. So again, it kind of just serves as that single repository for all your project management and planning. The other nice thing about BIT is if there happens to be staff turnover within your organization, by adding additional participants, you don't lose that data. Oftentimes we see people, oh, so and so left and they had all their information on their hard drive on their computer, or everything was in an Excel spreadsheet, and they leave. What do we do? Well, if you have everything uploaded and in the BIT database and inventory, and you've added another user, then you can still have access to that information, maybe even after a staff leaves. BIT also includes a direct link to the peer tool that I mentioned. You can view in BIT, it's known as nearby facilities map. And so you can click on that, and what it does is it pulls information from this peer tool in relation to your brownfield site. So it really can help you maybe identify additional sites within a target area for a grant application. It can help you prioritize which sites you want to address first based on the information that is pulled in from peer. So it's really pretty helpful. Our Tab EZ grant writing tool helps to streamline and simplify the grant writing process for any of the EPA Brownfields grants. Whether you're applying for multi-purpose, assessment, an RLF, or a cleanup grant, Tab EZ has a grant configuration template for you. For those that aren't familiar with Tab EZ, Again, it's free and easy to use, just as BIT is free and easy to use. It includes a framework to follow the EPA guidelines. It includes direct resources to helpful hints to help you address the criteria. It's password protected. So again, your information is free and ready to use. You can also, similar to BIT, it does have an opportunity for you to add additional participants. You can configure the grant for whatever application that you may be using. Once you configure the appropriate grant application, it creates a template. And you can see on the left-hand side, it kind of guides you through each of the grant guidelines criteria. Let's see. So once you have your configuration done and that outline on the left-hand side, within each section, the grant criteria will be listed along with the evaluation criteria. So you can view everything in one spot. Then there's an editable text field down at the bottom you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. So you can actually address that criteria right there as you're viewing it to ensure that hopefully you're maximizing points for that particular section. You do want to make sure that you are saving your work as you go. You can mark sections as complete so you can keep track of which sections you've completed and which ones you haven't. Once you've completed all the sections with the Tab Easy, you export it to Word for your final formatting, polishing, and final review before submitting to grants.gov. The Community Benefits Calculator is a tool that can help you begin evaluating kind of your rate of return on an investment in comparison to what you might be investing in a site versus public benefits. This isn't a end-all be-all for financial support. It's more of a, hey, just an overview to kind of help have discussions and make decisions on whether or not you want to proceed. We have demonstrations and online tutorials for all of our e-tools. So I encourage you, if you're interested in any of these or you just want to learn more, you can access those by visiting the KSU TAB YouTube channel. Tab assistance is, again, free. It's pretty easy to request. You can call us, you can send us an email. We'll set up a time to talk with you, learn about your needs, and figure out an appropriate course of action, and then we get started. And again, I don't think I can emphasize enough that all of these services and assistance we provide is free. Even if we bring in one of our external partners for a particular project, we fund that. So there's no cost to the community or organization. Some other things coming up that might be helpful for you as you think about reapplying for a Brownfields grant are we have several events coming up. Some are specific for particular states. Some are more general more general across the board. And again, visit our events webpage that you would have visited to register for this event. And we have an ongoing list of all of our events that are upcoming. Just a notice for some of you that may be interested, another great way to learn more about Brownfields programs is to attend the National Brownfields Conference, which will be held next May in Salt Lake City, Utah. So just a few follow-up, wrap-up, housekeeping items. For those of you, that did, log in and participate, you will receive a certificate of attendance by email. The recording, today's event has been recorded and will be uploaded to the website. So you can always view that and check back with any additional information. Here's all the contact information for today's speakers. And then, as mentioned by Scott, we really would appreciate any thoughts, comments that you have for today's event, what we did well, maybe what we didn't do so well, what we could improve on, as well as if there's anything else that you would like to see TAB do either through an event or other resources. We are all ears. We really take your feedback to heart and appreciate anything that you are willing to share with us and provide. And thank you to our panelists, Daphne, Chad, and Brian, for being on and sticking on. It's always very helpful to hear from other people who have gone through the experience and lessons learned. We like to say, why reinvent the wheel when there are other people, that have already gone through it. And it looks like we do have a question from Maud.
Hi there.
Hi.
My question is, once you do receive a Brownfields grant, I've gone to K-State TAB several times to try and get like checklists of grant management processes and steps to ensure that you go through with the EPA from like site eligibility determinations, checklists, make sure you're getting your 106 confirmations, things like that. And I've usually gone to other regions to receive those sorts of checklists. And I was wondering if we could get some of those sorts of tools for Region 7.
Yes. Well, I mean, I say that each region is a little bit different. So we would definitely want to coordinate with our Region 7 staff to make sure that we are providing the correct information. But yes, that is a good point. I think that is something that we can do. So thank you for bringing that up. I will add that to a to-do list for us.
Thanks for hearing me.
Okay. Well, thank you all for attending today. It was great to see some familiar names on as well as some new ones. So have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.